I'm pleased to be joined today by Dr. Imac Zambrana. She is an associate professor of education at the University of Oslo and an expert in the study of children's language development and social learning. She's also the chief scientific officer at Nordic Neurotech, which aims to use virtual reality to help with psychological and medical research. Imac, welcome to the Nature and Nurture podcast.
Hi, Adam. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. So we were just talking about how we both have a fairly broad range of interests. So there's like breadth versus depth, right? And you study children's learning. So can we talk about how that manifests? Like, is breadth versus depth in terms of learning?
Oh, wow. That's such an interesting question. Let me think. Well, could you specify your question a little bit? Like,
Okay,
what do you
so
want?
on one extreme, you're going to have children who are, or people generally, but I guess it would start off in childhood, who are very interested in almost everything, but maybe they get bored quickly. So it's like surface level knowledge, and then you achieve a certain level of satisfaction, and then you move on to the next topic. And at the other extreme, you'll have someone who focuses on one thing specifically and wants to learn everything they can about that one thing. And there's like this fixation.
Right. I
So what are
that
the developmental pathways that would lead to those different styles of learning?
oh, that's a big question, and it also, and I'm not sure I can answer that, but I do. It is interesting to reflect upon how different we are when it comes to interests,
Mhm.
what is, and when you look at young children, it's really interesting to see how something catches one child's attention and really just, it's almost like they're like magnets towards that, or the object is a
Mhm.
magnet for them, and while other children are really just interested in other things. And so when you look at children, how different they are when it comes to interests, I mean, there's there are some, I would guess there are some interesting patterns in the educational system and in our culture as a whole when it comes to
Mhm.
how we nurture those initial interests, how we nurture those natural interests. And I do find it quite baffling that we don't really consider the individual differences for that. So a lot of the time we develop these programs, we have this understanding of how learning should look like and what it should involve at different time points. And not only that, but what content should be presented, also what content they should be exposed to at different time periods and in the order of it. And so a lot of the time I'm wondering, so one thing is like the discussion of whether we have different styles of learning, whether we like, which is a
Mhm.
totally different question, but this is more about the interest and how to take advantage of the natural inclinations for learning that are within us when
Mhm.
it comes to motivation. And you see, for instance, young children, when you they seek information from us, when they are trying to understand the world, we know that when you respond to whatever they're interested in and what they're focusing on, like that is almost like that is very fruitful, and that is
Mhm.
almost a prerequisite for early acquisition of language, for early understanding of words and also of and new concepts. And so we're really then when we interacting with young children, uh, being kind of aware, perhaps not, we're not perhaps conscious of it, but we're in a way we're at least adapting to whatever their interest is,
Mhm.
and it's working. It's
Yeah.
working. It is the most, it's just such a amazing tool for entering their worlds and for teaching them about something they're focusing on right now. We don't need to direct or redirect their attention to something that we want to teach them, but we're actually just following whatever their lead is. And while in the school sector, in the pedagogical environments that we're creating that are more formal, we don't do that. We really don't do that at all. And I find that baffling, and in many ways I don't really understand it. Why we don't see that, because if, and you also see in the school system that a lot of students are in a way trying as hard as they can to get by, and they're grinding and trying to do their very best, and then they don't even believe that they like to learn, or that they're interested in school, or in new areas, and then suddenly they
Mm-hmm.
come over something that they are passionate about, and then they
Uh-huh.
can study all day long and become experts. And I met people like that that have no schooling almost, but who are really just small inventors. So they're
Mm-hmm.
creating and developing programs there that are really going to help us in the future in
Mm-hmm.
a way that is like unimaginable when you think of it from a perspective of education and the trust we put in it.
Yeah, language development is a really interesting case study of this trade-off between breadth and depth, and structured versus exploratory learning. Because on one hand, you have like a rigorous education system that's teaching kids grammar and all of these rules that you have to learn with some depth. But then on the other hand, you're kind of always learning language just through passive exploration, right? Like you're listening for hours a day, and really anytime you want to communicate, you're speaking every single day for hours per day. So it's kind of this natural learning process, so that kids probably don't think of themselves as learning when they're just doing something as simple as speaking to adults.
Oh, it's almost like a seamless stacking of knowledge that is happening and ongoing from the beginning. Like
Mm-hmm.
in the beginning, you have these kind of foundational social cognitive and cognitive mechanisms, abilities that and that makes us, open up possibility for us to learn from others, to learn from our environments, taking information socially, but also physically and emotionally on all levels. And eventually we develop this amazing capacity to use language. So that is like a long process, but still eventually
Mm-hmm.
we start to grasp with a conceptual understanding, meaning that is really that is more abstract.
Mm-hmm.
Makes us able to share on a different level, to process information on different levels than we could have without it. And we see that it is also interesting that that is also a foundation for further learning. So even learning how to read and write, like it's that, like it's building on these initial skills. It's
Mm-hmm.
not possible. It's a cultural process. It's not possible without this intricate relationship with language as such, with the skills that we have developed so far. We need to have some basis. So all of this kind of generation of knowledge, the understanding of the world that we live in, and also the ability to operate on it and really be participate in it is dependent on constant learning that is building on top, like building on each other. And so we're, when we're looking at it, we're making, we're slicing the cake in a way, and we're looking
Uh-huh.
at separate small parts of the story, but it's really it's hard to imagine how it's really hard to imagine language without thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
The ability to write, the writing system that we have without language, so it's all related. And yeah, I find that intriguing,
Mm-hmm.
but also it's there's so much to build upon when it comes to skills, and it's also so much to build upon when it comes to inner motivation. um,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Do you know of
And
any research linking um, language sophistication to specific interests or hobbies or passions? So, here's an example of this. Let's say you have a kid who is average in their reading and language ability, but they're also super obsessed with dinosaurs. So they're memorizing all these different dinosaur names that are like super big words, way more advanced than what any kid would be learning in any other domain. So their average except in their sort of domain of expertise. And that could apply to anything, whether it's like you're super interested in dinosaurs or sports or cars. Like you're going to learn these niche topics that are more advanced than comparatively the rest of your language ability.
Uh, I don't know of that many studies or any researchers that really, but I might be ignorant here, that is really targeting how interest like that is stimulating the ability to, first of all, vocabulary as such, or the development of language skills, or how these kind of these interests are maybe becoming a motivation for learning how to read and write in and of itself, which again will lead to more information about these topics,
Mm-hmm.
and would just fuel the whole process of that, or that whole interest. I don't know about a lot of research that is. I don't know about any research that's doing
Mm-hmm.
anything related to that, but I could imagine how interested in. I always wanted to look more, and some people might have done this, but I always want to look more on the in early development, the content of what people talk about and implications for various outcomes, like not only perspectives on things, but more so, but really more so how they're like what direction their interests goes.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really related to what you're talking about. But yes,
Uh-huh.
it's really the content analysis, like the content of conversations that children are having with their caregivers in school. I don't feel like that has been given too much attention recently, when it comes to the implication it has for interests and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
But when you meet children that are quite precautious when it comes to interests or domains like that, you can see that sometimes that they're also might be quite early in reading development, or
Mm-hmm.
might have advanced language, because in order to talk about that topic in such detail, in order for us to understand that they have such a huge interest in a topic, they actually need to be able to convey that to us. So in a way, it's hard to know what came first, what is the
Uh-huh.
cause, what is the effect here, but I guess it would be interesting to try to disentangle
Mm-hmm.
some of that.
Right.
Mm.
So your earlier research focused more on language development in the technical sense, and then you broadened out to like language as a mode of communication or knowledge acquisition. Is that right?
Yes, in a way, I became interested in language and perhaps communication first. So I read this book by Michael Tomasello, The Cultural Origin of Human Cognition. And when it came out, and I was a young student, and I knew I wanted to understand more about how we communicate and why we communicate the way we do. And I really started to look into ways to study communication and social cognition. But then, as I read more and more, I became more and more interested in language development, as it is our most salient tool for communication. It's
Mm-hmm.
so unique for our species, and so I started to develop this interest for language development, and I did a master thesis, or we call it here like a master thesis, and where I was looking at children and their mothers children with and without language delays, and their mothers, and looking at how they interacted and their language and communicative exchanges. And I started to really I want to understand more about how I could study this more in depth, in depth, and I looked at these exchanges through sequential analysis, and I realized that, oh, this is such a nice way to start to understand how children are responded to, how parents are really responding to children. And what we found was that they were quite responsive, and also that despite what a lot of studies were suggesting back then, that children with language delays didn't really get or lacked the input they needed, we saw that the mothers actually really showed an interest in and were really aware of what the phonological and grammatical errors the children were making, and so that they were correcting it, they were providing input to it, but maybe not enough, but they did so. And so I found it very interesting to look at how there's an interdependency there that is quite natural.
Mm-hmm.
And so I built, when I started doing my PhD, I wanted to look more into early family indicators, and also early, I would say, communication skills as predictors for language development. And I ended up going from looking at it very in depth to looking at it at a very I would a much more, I would say, broader level rather than in-depth level. And we use these big child cohort data sets that where we had 100,000 families. I didn't use all in my I looked at there were different sample sizes back then, but it would be like 20,000 and 40,000 sometimes, and we start to look at, and it's interesting with secondary data, because you don't have the most in-depth data that you can have about that topic, but you suddenly have something else. You have statistical strength to look at really, really low incident data. And so you can start to look at what it means, what something means, even if it's not that, even if it's really rare. And so we started to look at and disentangle different aspects of early communication. And of course, many might disagree with these results, but I wanted to understand whether there were other early social cognitive skills than rather than and communicative skills other than gestures and pointing gestures that were strong indicators of early language development. And we looked at what we called imitative acts, and we found that they were actually quite good early markers of language development. But we also I ended up stepping into a field where there were lots of research showing that actually pointing gestures are so important for language development, because you can point out something specifically that you're interested in, and then someone labels it, and it's such a powerful tool to access words and separately and very precise, but then we suddenly introduced this kind of there might be something else, and so we suggested that although pointing gesture might really be a great indicator of children's overall communicative abilities and interests, it's really the capacity for symbolic representation might be reflected in other abilities such as imitation. And I looked at a lot of different studies here, but basically, I guess I really felt that when you're working with these data, you're understanding all the limitations of them, right? But it taught me about some of the potential of it and how much work it is that you need to do in order to secure the quality of the data. And really that some mindful and careful analysis can overcome some, but not all of these limitations. So
having access to such large data sets, and then it sounds like you're looking at sort of these environmental determinants of language learning, whether that's like your home environment or whether it's how active the parent is in teaching their child. are there also more innate factors that you looked at? So this would be like the classic nature nurture debate in terms of language development. Like how much of this is innate and biologically predicted, and how much of this is like predicted by your environment?
Yes. And I mean, I always found it not frustrating, but challenging in a way, because you want to know why something is develops in a way that it does. And you really want to understand what the sources of that development is. But a lot of time when we're looking at the data that I've been talking about right now, it's more the observational data where you're looking at exchanges, you're looking at, it's really correlational data. It's just like how something correlates or operates together in that particular space and time. And it's not really, you can't disentangle causal factors when you're observing children like that. And when you're looking at big data sets like I did, you're also looking at, sometimes you do have the time factor there because there are longitudinal data, but you can't really control for all of these factors that are unmeasured, and especially heritable factors. It's really hard to do that. And so you always have that kind of at the back of your head or mind. You're really like, you know that you found a relationship, but you really don't know if there's something else, and especially something that the parents and the children or share. Like, so, but we did try to disentangle some of these contributions by looking at using sibling designs. So what we had, because we did have, I guess it was somewhere in between 15 and 25,000 siblings. So we could actually look at shared and non-shared factors. But this was more related to a particular group of children. So we looked at typical developing children as well, but we also looked at children who were at risk for language delays due to being born premature. And so, but a big question in that area is that you really don't know whether it is being preterm per se, that is because of the risks involved in being born premature, is very much related to the fact that during the last trimester of the pregnancy, that's a very important period for brain development and the nervous system in general. And so you don't, it's hard to know whether, like when you see children or you in the clinic or in clinical work, and you see children with these kind of or that were born premature, and they also have language delays or other delays, it's hard to know whether this is only related to the fact that they were born premature, or whether it could be explained by other factors like family factors or factors related to the child. So and so because other factors related to the pregnancy or related to heritable factors might explain why they ended up with language delays, or with why they're born premature, but also it could also be shared stuff. And so and the same goes with child, what the individual factors related to the child. So by using these siblings designs, we could disentangle this and really try to look at how much of in a way like how much unexplained risk for language delays remains after you take into account all these factors, all the measured factors of individual and parental risk and pregnancy risks, and also then the shared heritable factors because they're siblings. So we don't know exactly what those unmeasured factors are, but what we found is that it actually controls away a lot of the delays, you could say. Like, so there's less left for the premature state to explain. after you take into account those things. And I think those kind of designs can help us really understand, like, or identify factors to focus on to really understand the intricate picture of delays and of delays in different clinical groups.
I want to propose a model to you that I hope might encapsulate what we were just talking about. So this could apply sort of to anything in psychology, but we can take language learning as the specific example here. So at the smallest scale, you might be studying, let's say, cellular level neuronal firings in the context of language learning. Like, how do specific neurons communicate with each other in a specific brain area as they're doing a specific task, and in this case related to passing along information related to language. One level up from that, you might have, and then also at that micro level, you might have genetic factors contributing to those individual differences at the cellular level. A level up from that, you might have studies of different neural networks within particular brain regions and functions of them. So for language, you might have like Broca's area and Wernicke's area. A level up from that, you might be studying specific developmental disorders with those specific brain areas. So this might apply to like those clinical populations you were talking about. So that's still a subpopulation compared to the general population. Level above from that, you might be studying language development as it applies to children more generally. But even there, you're going to have to pick an age region. So there's going to be some people who focus on like a very particular part, let's say in infant development. And then there's other people who are going to take a more broadly developmental approach, like maybe from 0 to 18. And then a level up from that, you might have these broadly social effects. So it's like, okay, given that the biological side of development is relatively constant across all people, let's look at the social and environmental determinants of how that can be influenced. And then a level up from that, you can say, rather than looking at specific environmental factors like in the home life, how can we look at cultural factors that varies, like on opposite sides of the globe? And then I guess the ultimate level might be something like an evolutionary explanation of language development, like looking across a time span of millions of years, how did this evolve? So if you want to understand a single concept, you need all of those put together, but there's never a single researcher who does all of that. So what is it that allowed you to focus on your particular slice of that entire view?
Oh, what made me able to do that, allow me to do that? Well, I guess reality, like just the fact that you can't cover everything. But I mean, you're describing the dream project in a way where imagine having an insights into all of those levels in the individual, everything that they enter the world with, and everything that they have developed, and also that they have available to them during development, and then how that system meets the environment, and how that those complex transactions between the organism and the environment is happening over time. I really want to understand all of that, but I can't. So you have to start somewhere. And I think most of us are starting somewhere and trying to like, okay, let's look at it. But I find it, and I guess I find it hard to accept that reality. And so I do jump around a bit. I do find a lot of topics interesting. It is sort of like I mentioned, like in a brief, when we briefly talked before starting, it's like I feel like a lot of scientists that I admire, they are really good at starting at a corner of like in the corner of a puzzle or somewhere in the puzzle. They have this like unfinished puzzle, and they start there, and they're patient, and they put together pieces next to each other, and they get kind of like a part of the picture, an overview of that, and deep understanding of that, and then they move on to a connected, related topic, and it's like builds on each other like that, and it really shows this kind of amazing development of their research and work over time. And I'm more like the person who would like I guess I'm a procrastinator in many senses. but I do think that I would rather call it something else. I guess I'm just very curious, and so and I think we all are, but in different ways. And my attention, there's so many things I want to understand at the same time simultaneously, and so I start somewhere in a puzzle, and then I go somewhere else in a puzzle, and I have all these kind of disconnected pieces, and I hope that eventually I will be able to connect them together somehow, and that it's not just this kind of illusion of knowledge that I'm currently in the state of. But I guess we're all doing it differently, but it feels in a way like a lifelong pursuit. And I guess it feels like that for many people, just our approaches are different.
Yeah. So it seems like there's two interesting ideas there, because on one hand, more broadly, everyone seems to do something like that. Everyone seems to start with an incomplete puzzle and they pick a random corner or random area, maybe even just by chance. This is where you grow up and this is what you're exposed to in early development. So you have like a starting place and then you branch out from there. Everyone does that. And then the more narrow question is, people go in different directions. Why do they go in different directions? So this is kind of related to that knowledge acquisition thing we were talking earlier about. So broadly, you have the process of knowledge acquisition, which seems relatively similar across individuals. But then where people guide themselves, like which knowledge people seem to prioritize over others, there's tremendous variability in that.
Right. Yeah, I do believe it is. And I mean, there is some work from linguistics and more the linguistics part of language research where they're looked at more on what kind of ideas that are connected with different types of language use, and so like whether it reflects deeper perspectives on the world. And I guess there are and that's very interesting, but I really don't think we have started to understand how kind of the inner motivations and interests for learning about specific topics, about and the diversity in those topics, and our interests, how that really shapes what we learn and how well we learn whatever we're exposed to. Like how well we can reconcile with the cultural ways of teaching, of presenting knowledge. And I guess we're all, in a way, when you meet people that are so different, and it's so inspiring to talk to different people, because their minds are, they have this a lot of the same they have some of the same mechanisms, this like they're functioning in many ways similarly, and we did like both with regard to functional aspects and the structural aspects of how we're composed, but on the other hand, they're so different. And when you look at siblings and you study siblings, and you look at how, in a way, one child is really just responding to some topics, to some activities in very positive ways, while others are perhaps not enjoying it as much, and there are differences in the ways they are interacting in across different situations and across different activities. And so you both have a lot of cultural variance, and it obviously related to time as well. It changes all the time, so we have all this kind of cultural variance when it comes to both concurrent, like in a contemporary cultural variance, but also over time, and in what we're focusing on and what we find important to learn about and teach our children about, and what knowledge that we consider to be needed in the population, but there's also all this, so we have that there, you have all this variance, and it really just humbles me, like as an educator, but also as a researcher, trying to find common developmental patterns and common developmental markers that so often when I'm looking at these data, even when you're looking at a very homogeneous sample, there's a lot of pieces that doesn't fit, and it's so much variance. And so when we do this, like when we study children by using experimental designs, there's like, one really want to know that manipulation that you're exposing them to is what is explaining or like has an impact, and you really want to understand how it has an impact. So if you're exposing a child to perhaps a toy that is working very unexpectedly, and or perhaps it's not working, it's broken or whatever, and other children are not exposed to that, but their toy is working just fine, or in typical ways, and you want to, like, what we want to do is really understand, like, okay, so how does that impact whether they ask for help, whether they ask for information, whether they are becoming curious, whether it elicits something in them compared to the children who weren't exposed to that. But then you have these kind of, and a lot of time you find is that it has an impact, but something else is also driving the performances of the children, because there is a huge variance in all data sets across all developmental studies. And I'm just like wondering, when are we going to really try to understand that variance? Like, there is not like it's 5%, it's like 10, 15, 20, 30%. We're talking about many children who are not responding to the task that we're exposing them to in the expected way. And so what is it then? Or it's like, there's something else. It's not, either it's not interesting enough, either there are other factors that are influencing that particular situation, which could be noise. I mean, like it could be a bad day for them. It could be that, but there are also other things, like experimenters are different from each other. Research assistants are different from each other. We have the belief that we're all like using the same manuals and the same instructions, then it stays the same, but we're not duplicated perfectly. And so, and we're different too. And there might be in the meetings of people and it might happen stuff that we are not really understanding completely yet. And I hope we can do more research that are really like looking at those other factors, not only what confirms our hypothesis, but also what might challenge it, or what might be added to it.
You could fill multiple textbooks on how to understand those individual differences and what sources of variability might contribute to noise in your data. So putting all that aside, let's imagine we can control for those individual differences. This seems like a good time to transition to your work on social learning, because social learning, at least at a high level, like theoretically, it will apply to anyone. It's an effect that's sort of external, working inwards, and would apply to varying degrees despite those individual differences, right?
Yeah. So what is your question?
Well, let's talk about social learning broadly. So maybe we could break it down into different forms that social learning might take, right? Because there's like learning in your family, in your educational environment, from your peers, from the media. That's probably enough. We could
I mean, it is just fascinating how we learn, like how the different ways we learn. Like, we don't know, we learn through many means, and one of them is through others, and it's only one of them, and sometimes we learn through others, but we also, like, there are also other factors involved. But it's really, there's an interesting almost like a predisposition to interact with others, and for the purpose of learning about the external world, or learning about the world around us. It's intriguing, like, because it you can see it so early on. It's the interest in not only the other people, but in the environment, the interest in other, like they call from in other more knowledgeable others, they call them, or we call them, like how grown-ups are also responding to that interest, in our almost like prepared, like this kind of preparedness for sharing, for being involved in this shared ground. So and just almost like taking in the world together, but by in the process of doing that, we're also sharing like our ideas, our questions, our thoughts about it, and there is just this perfect meeting between the developing child and the world around, the social world around them, when it comes to like providing and seeking information. And so I started to look at this some years ago, when I wanted to understand more about like what is it that is driving this development, like what is going on here, what kind of experiences is fueling children's information seeking, what kind of experiences are unnecessary, or just like, if you just look at it, like how does the transmission from child to parent, and parent to child, happen over time, and how do they fuel each other? It's I find it puzzling, but that's only one aspect of it. On the other, like, that's only one dyad or triad that we're talking about here, and then you can add all the other people, like the peers, siblings, then strangers, and you have all these levels of people who know the child more or less, that are interacting with the child early on, and also providing information. So that requires a very flexible system. Not only are parent and children different from each other, but also their experiences, other experiences, are so different, both in quality, quantity, and content. So this system is so flexible. It's like and studying and looking at, when we look at young children in interacting with their parents, I mean, in the beginning, I had a sense, an idea of what it is to be a sensitive parent. Like I taught, like, being sensitive is being kind. Like we like being kind, being so being a very pedagogical, or in the sense that we think is pedagogical, being a very socially attuned, and it is about that. It is important, but it's also interesting to see that children and parents are not acting only in the ways we expect them to do. They're like I seen, without like identifying any individuals, I've seen parents interacting with their children in ways, when the children are young, where I'm thinking, oh, that was a bit like, this is very different from how I would interact with such a young child. It's very demanding, or it's very compared to what I would do, and I might see it might look more demanding or challenging or something than I see compared to other parents in that sample. And then I see them 2 years later or 1 year later, and I look at the interaction, and it just developed into this dance of competitive fun, curiousness, and a lot of high fives. But it's kind of like a team, like a lot of teamwork between them, that I could see the start of early on, that has now become something completely different. So whenever we're looking at how children and parents are, but also children in interaction with anyone, really, how they're interacting in one situation, we really don't know how this will look a week from now, a year from now, 2 years from now. And so we really need to understand kind of not only the different situation and different experiences, but also how those experiences fuels patterns over time, how in interaction with the child and who they are. And
Uh-huh.
so I don't know if that is related to what you were talking about,
So
but
in this research, how can you identify whether uh, an observed effect is actually due to this social interaction between parent and child that you're describing, or due to something else? Here's an example.
mm,
But there's a reliable finding that the number of books in a household can predict children's reading and writing test scores. So you might think that more books means the children are reading more or being read to more. So that predicts the improvement in scores. But there's at least two other possible explanations. One might be something like more books are owned by families who are wealthier or more highly educated. So maybe it's not the books themselves, but maybe it's just growing up in that higher socioeconomic status household. Another explanation is that maybe even ignoring the books or the socioeconomic status effects, that maybe adults who buy more books are more intelligent. So maybe there's some genetic transmission, and that the child's improved test scores might just be due to that increased intelligence and not due to the environmental effects. In reality, it's probably all of those in some interacting way. But how do you identify whether something is transmitted through social learning or through any of these other possible modes of transmission?
mm, it it is a challenge. And like you said, it's probably a complex picture that involves all or some of those factors. And like, it is a very great limitation that when you're looking at correlations like that, we there are so many factors that we're not considering. What we know is that the only way to, not the only way, but for to impact the child's development, there needs to be a contact between the child and between the environment. And what I mean by that, the experiences need to be direct in some way or another. Like, it's not like this socioeconomic status as such, which is a term that we created, impacts child development. It's working through other processes, way of interacting, nutrition, whatever is offered of resources or qualitative interactions.
Uh-huh.
There has to be an experiential basis for anything to have an influence or interacting with the child in development. And so a lot of time we're looking at these pretty abstract ideas about something that is really, that has all these indicators that we decide that it is, which is important. We need to find a way to structure and find an entrance into looking at how experiences impacts development. But it, I, I mean, there's also need to be humble about what that means, and really, and I think most people are, and you don't have those big wars anymore where people are arguing for one and like for nature and nurture alone, and like but everyone's really, I feel, or not, I can't imagine anyone not being on on the same pace with regard to this. But there's very few people who really truly believe that an indicator like that, I think, I at least believe few people believe this, but that an indicator like that, which is not a measure of a direct experience, is directly influencing a child's life. So the way I'm looking at it is, there are many ways to try to understand how development happens, and how to disentangle factors from each other. And one way to get a grasp of what the experiences involves is to look at those experiences over time, trying to really understand and look at how, from moment to moment, how one kind of behavior is impacting another behavior in another individual. And it's obvious that if I insult you right now and you start to cry, I know I hurt you, and you know that I hurt you, and everyone who saw us talking know that I did that, I impacted you negatively by doing that. And the same goes for interactions between parents and children. There are a lot of the times when we see that the direct impact of the experiences they have is evident. It's not like a very complicated picture, but at other times we are trying to look at how an experience at some time point is influencing a behavior at another time point, and the timeline could be short or long, and we really have to be sure and understand the mechanisms of development, and we have to understand and have an idea of what we're really looking at, trying to explain. And that's really hard, and especially if you can't control for obvious factors like heritable factors, like shared genes, stuff like that. If we can't, or share genetic factors, I mean, we don't share genes, but anyways, but if we can control for, that, we're like getting closer to understanding or seeing kind of the relationships, and whether there truly are relationships that have any ground in, like, in causation, or, but we still don't know. There are so many, and to be honest, looking at children like that, when I look at, for instance, language interactions early on, and then I look at the children's language development 3 years later, I truly don't believe that that one single experience that I looked at is explaining all of that. There's so many other factors. There's so many other experiences that I have not looked at. There's so many. I only measured it maybe once, twice at the most. How can, like, it is for me that is just wish thinking, and so it's more complicated, but still it approaches something. The more rigid you are with regard to controlling and understanding what you're looking at, what you have in your control and what you don't have. Experimental work adds to this, because it really, like we can look at least directly right here and now. If I expose you to that, like if I'm being very rude to you while another person is being very kind, and we look at either you or we look at two different people, we can at least have some more basis for understanding that that we control for that direct experience by varying it, control in a controlled way. But at the same time, we're not accounting for your personal characteristics, you as a person, your emotional and intellectual capacities and skills, and a lot of other skills and capacities and inclinations, and we're not really controlling for any of that, and a lot of that can still have an impact of that exact kind of, you could say, behavioral change that we're seeing, that we believe is due to the manipulation that we did. But it is really like it's the kind of, it's a more rigid approach, but you still have all of those factors that we're not controlling for. And I guess we're still trying, because we really want to understand. So we're not, like, we're still trying, and I admire that in all the colleagues that are working on interesting and difficult questions.
Yeah, this is something that plagues all of psychology and probably most other fields as well. It's like you're only as good as your variables are, and the variables, you could, I guess there's some people who might make an argument that something doesn't actually exist, like does socioeconomic status actually exist, or is it just capturing a lot of shared variance between a bunch of micro level variables that have observable effects?
I guess maybe maybe it does a little bit of both, but I guess we do have a responsibility to not mislead. And and when I'm thinking about that, is there's a lot of the time that you see science disseminated in the news, in the media, to parents, to educators, where we're claiming to really know that something is working in a way that it does, or we have found a correlation, and our conclusions are really painting a picture that is impacting the way they interact with children or the way they are behaving. And I think that is sometimes like that is a huge responsibility. Now it's starting to rain. I don't know if you can hear it.
I can't hear it. So
Okay.
it's kind of like between science and then science communication, it's almost like this big game of telephone where you could have in a paper something like this: we found a marginally significant correlation between A and B. So it's not causal and it's not even statistically significant. Maybe it's just like a hair above whatever your cutoff would be. And then that might get reported in outlet one as like there's a correlation between A and B. And then further down the line of telephone, it's like science says that A causes B, and we need to avoid A if it's like some bad food, if B is like some bad outcome.
Yes, and I guess all of those, and there are a lot of the time, I guess it's not it's without outside the researchers' controls. This narrative has its own life, either because it's like relevant right now for some other reason, and or that it sells well. It is a cool story to tell, but I guess like we do, it's not always within our control, but I do think that when we do have control over it in our dissemination of the work, in how we communicate the work to students, to really explain how complex it is, to not just look for significant effects, to not just try to like, yes, of course we should develop rigid methods to rigorous methods that are really trying or aiming at addressing a question we in a good way. I think we should also teach them about the limitations that are there, and that sometimes we actually sometimes in some areas and of child development or other areas, there is a narrative out there that is not founded on science that is that has such a solid ground yet. And sometimes we need to tell that story as well. And it's some things we can be pretty sure of, but other things we can't. And to be honest, there are a lot of I mean, I really like studies that, and I think it's an important perspective to have, to study children and individuals across cultures. We do that very little, and I haven't done it enough at all. But it is it's very it's a great way to show how different experiences can be, and yet at the same time we all seem to acquire language, for instance. We all seem to acquire skills that are quite similar and transferable across societies, and so creating of course, at the same time, as society, you might have to make some adjustments in order for your skills to be relevant in a different context, if it was used for some other purposes in another context. So you have that aspect there, and it's important that kind of meeting between the needs of the society and the experiences we're deciding to give each other. But at the same time, like I also think it is important and believe it is important for us to study the same questions, not only replicate the same studies over and over again, which is important, of course, very important, but also vary it. varied in such a way that we do know how the same mechanisms operate in a slightly different context, with a slightly different a child or children, with other parents. And so if you, for instance, study socioeconomic status, and you're interested in children that live in poverty compared to children who are living in families with who are not poor, and you're comparing children across kind of the socioeconomic strata like that, I think it's important to also look at and replicate the same study, not only looking at and comparing the same groups that you've defined, but also perhaps define it a bit differently. Also look at create understand kind of how, okay, but you also have groups of people who we can group together in such a group. Maybe we could group them together a bit differently to really understand and disentangle like how some factors related to that group might be relevant while others might not be. So that kind of, and really when children learn early in development, like we know that in order for children to learn, for instance, language, we can't repeat the same utterance over and over and over again. They're not going to learn that much. We can't say things the exact same way. We're talking in diverse way, and they're getting a very varied set of input, but the variation is they're not even noticing it. You know, like when I talk about a TV show one day, and I talk about the same TV show the next day, I might vary my how I talk about it and the way I phrase my sentences. And it's really the same thing for us. We're learning about the environment. We're learning about the world out there. And for us to really understand and get a grasp of how it works, I really think we need to vary it slightly.
Yeah.
So
there's like a natural selection type process that happens there, because especially if you're, let's say, doing interviews and you're practicing the same question, it's going to be a little bit different every time you use it. Maybe one time you say something, it's way worse, and you feel embarrassed. And then another time you say something that sounded way better than what you'd been using before. And then suddenly that becomes your sort of new script. And so it's like this evolutionary mechanism, sort of.
Sort of, in a way, yes. That's a good analogy. I wonder, like sometimes I'm wondering if I'm also not criticizing the important work that is ongoing with regard to highlighting the importance of replications. It's super important. I just think we should do that at the same time as we also address not only how to create, like not only how to make sure that what we know in one study is truly so, but also understand why it isn't. So not only try to keep it the same way for just to in a way confirm that what our understanding is kind of it, and we have we have kind of the evidence for proclaiming something, but also understand kind of why it varied, why a study got different results than the others. And it can be easily it can be related to a lot of things, but I would love to see more work varying it in a systematic way.
So on the subject of science that is not yet on solid ground, we just lived through an unprecedented pandemic, and we don't know the long-term effects of online school, let's say, on children's social and cognitive development. So I know that this is going to be mostly speculative, but in your expert opinion, what do you think is going to happen to these kids who had to learn in this novel format for many years?
I guess like many others, and I know that a lot of people are looking at this and really have empirical data that can actually support some of their thoughts and ideas that and questions that they probably raised. I didn't, I haven't looked at it and the impact of the pandemic on schooling, or but of course you can. I mean, it is an absolute abrupt shift in the method of learning and teaching. And suddenly from one day to another, it probably wasn't that fast. It might have been gradual for some, but for some people, it probably was like very, very swift, that shift. And so you're suddenly in a completely new context. For some children, and that transition might have been more kind of unexpected, and also something they're more inexperienced with than others. Some children are very experienced with technology and with that world. It might be age related, it might be interest related, and also related to family resources, and also just also family choices, and just like choices that might be more or less conscious. And so you have children that are put in this situation that are coming from very different backgrounds and might have also varied experience with this new form and this new form of learning. And I guess we probably will see a lot of research on this in the next few years, and I'm pretty sure there are many labs that have been working on this, and I know a few colleagues have started to look at it, and it is kind of a natural experiment, which we
we don't have a control group exactly to compare.
No, we only have those children before and after, and but then we can't control really, like that's a problem in and of itself. But when we also have children of the same age, the years before and the years after, of course, what we can do, what is possible, but I don't know if it's going to happen, is obviously to put some people back in the classroom and other children continue the virtual teaching, and then you can compare the differences. That will never happen, probably, and not systematically, and not without knowing how it impacts their learning. But there might be schools and might be regions that are moving back into the regular school environment at different time points. So some societies had a lockdown for shorter time periods, and others had for longer. And you could try to use that information about exposure, but then you probably have cultural differences as well. But still, there is you have before and after, so you can look at changes and stuff like that. There are ways to try to understand the impact it had, but there's, like we talked about earlier, there is really no perfect way of controlling for everything here, because the control group, like you said, will always be somewhat different and not perfectly comparable, but still there are a lot of smart scientists out there, and I'm sure they're gonna use a lot of interesting new ways to control some of these factors. I do have to say that I'm more well, one thing that I guess some people are concerned about, which I understand, is really how children who might live in environments where resources are scarce, or home environments where resources are scarce, how it impacts them to be taken out of a situation where the resources might be more it would just be more resources like the school setting or the childcare
Right.
setting. So of course there is, I guess, and also like just electronic devices.
Mhm.
Just imagine, like we think about it we can think about it in many ways. Like there is like obviously the technological, the social, the support system around you and all of
Mhm.
that is relevant, but just only looking at how different physical environment
Mhm.
children have at home, and how comfortable it is to sit in a chair for that long or look at a screen. Like
Mhm.
some might have it installed in such a way that it's more comfortable to sit down and look at the screen like that.
Mhm.
Like I'm doing right now, I'm looking down a little because I didn't put it up on anything, and that is probably not good for a long period of time, while other parents might be more aware of the fact that it will be much more comfortable for my child if I raise it a little bit and they have the keys down here. So it's just like those minor adjustments make
Mhm.
it a better experience physically. And then you have all the other layers of that experience
Mhm.
that might vary. So
Right.
I like any, it is an extreme situation, but it's like, but it like all learning contexts, um, like there will be variability with regard to how well the fit is between the individual and where they come from and what they have available to them
Mhm.
outside that environment,
Right.
um, and that environment. So
Mhm.
it's going to be interesting to look at how that particular situation is might have
Mhm.
specific um, implications, but I mean,
Yeah.
all kind of all contexts will have. I'm more worried about uh, I'm more worried about how people use um, uh, the virtual world and technical tools
Mhm.
um, today, and how um, in the ways they're doing it that might impact
Mhm.
the interactions with others, but not only with like, but especially among parents. It's like
Mhm.
there is some research suggesting that like the parents' behavior is actually impacted by it. It really takes up attention, and it
Mhm.
takes up um, 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 kind of their time, and time is limited. It is what it is. It is not and it is running constantly. So if you're focusing
Right.
on one, you're not focusing on something else. So you
Yeah.
might not have uh, people available for you to have those exchanges that are direct.
Uh-huh. So on the technology front, there seems to be an interesting mixed set of findings or predictions because on one hand, on the negative side, which seems to be what we hear the most about, you might have some kids who don't have the same access to technology at home if they're learning online. They might not be as engaged if they have to learn from a screen, hearing from their teacher on the screen, where it's easy to like not pay attention. You have a bunch of distractions at home. Maybe your attention span is getting worse, especially if we're talking about like social media use, where there's a lot of like instant gratification. So all that
Mm.
we seem rightfully worried about. But then on the positive side, there's also more educational opportunities. So like what I imagine you're doing with this Nordic Neurotech company. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
I can talk about that. Yes, I recently started this position, I stepped into this position as the chief scientific officer, and in this newly founded, I would say, I call it interdisciplinary science lab. at Nordic Neurotech. This is a tech company focused on technology and innovation, and we're right now building 1,000 square meters lab for scientists from different fields in academia, and also partners and user organizations from the health sector, policy, and the private sector. So we're really, although it will be mostly this actual scientific work will be interdisciplinary, and we will focus on creating a hub where people that are coming from technology, that could be virtual reality, which is one of the tools we have there, but also who are developing hardware and software for other tools like sensory technology and tracking system, machine learning, and also people from the cognitive and medical sciences and neuroscience in particular. They're looking more at functional and structural brain imaging and recordings, as well as eye tracking. And so we're basically creating a hub where people from very different disciplines can meet and start to look at some of the questions that are related to improving opportunities for people in a long-term perspective. So really, like, we're confronted in a situation today where we're going to face many changes when it comes to what we need from people. This will cause challenges when it comes to mental health, when it comes to our educational systems. So we really need people who are mentally, socially, and cognitively equipped for the future, in order to solve some problems that are social, environmental, political. I mean, all of these challenges that we have, and in order to do that, we really need individuals who are that have the support to develop their full potential and utilize it. And so we want to really study both, like, with basic science, how we can develop tools that can capture the ways that our minds and our brains function in relation to different experiences, but also how we can provide experiences that through those tools that can make it easier to adjust for people that might experience more challenges than others. It is essentially about contributing to society by stimulating mental health, learning, and developmental opportunities. So
is really any of this virtual reality work directed specifically at kids or at education?
Right. So we're really just building this up now, and we have started to identify partners, and we're started to set up labs and people. But the focus so far has been, or the focus right now is more related to adults and youths, and especially young people who are at risk for being excluded from society in different ways. But like, my hope and what I want to do is really to use this opportunity to also study how we can look at the ways in which we can provide tools for children in order to facilitate their learning and development as well. And also, especially, I mean, there are a lot of interesting meetings between children and technology today. and we're not going to get less technology in the future. It's only going to this development and this kind of this development it's just is tremendous. And so so it's inevitable that that children will have more and more tools that are, you could say, that are machine based in some way, or not that are not direct social experiences. It might be more indirect, or at least direct in the sense of physical and spatial, but so we're going to enter that world, and it's not of course, I mean, the interactions that we're seeing today, and that we all like that we're gonna see in the unforeseen future, like children will always need interactions with people in order to develop. Like it's not possible to survive without the caring and warm support of others who are present. It's just not possible. But we can also provide experiences to children and to young people who are might not have some tools and resources available to them physically. We can provide them. Like it's possible to develop materials that can give experiences that are otherwise lacking in their environment. It is also possible to make sure that the hardware and software we're developing is really considering and taking care of the people that are using them. So that we're we need to understand how the mind process information, and that is provided through through those means, and we understand a lot about how people process information and how the cognitive machinery works. But there is a lot of things we do not understand, and also we need not to be ignorant of what we know when we're developing new tools. So there are many ways to really that it will be, that it is that technology can be relevant, and for our studies of children, and also of the tools we're developing for the young people in the future with regard to their learning. I mean, but what I'm mostly concerned about is because it's to make sure that we're really taking into consideration what we know about the cognitive, sensory, social, and emotional system that the individual is, and that individual is composed of, or like, and that and when we are also developing these tools, when we're developing tools that are either just going to be used, or that might even and help and add to what they already have, but sometimes maybe also be swapped with what they have now. So we really need to understand and be aware of the ways in which this development can take into consideration human development.
Sounds like a great mission.
Yeah, so there's going to be, but I mean, I guess I'm like I said earlier, I really want to gain as much insight as possible about the world and about the social and cognitive potential of our minds, and this is really, and realizing how different fields are overlapping with each other. Well, when I realized that, and I really start to understand kind of and grasp the that there are so many new questions and shared questions that we have, and that and I really want to be part of trying to take advantage of those innovations that we will see in the future. But I also really find it particularly intriguing to support this common pursuit of ours, and I do not feel like the most fruitful way I can do that is by focusing solely on my own career and development. Mm-hmm. I really want to support others, and I really feel like I really enjoy helping others and providing them with the resources, but also the belief that they can do this, that they can fulfill their potential as scientists, and I hope to have a great, an additional impact by doing this, rather than just focusing on my own work. So I truly believe like talent development, which is a major part of this work that we're starting now from different areas, and introducing them to each other, making sure there are exchanges there that can be innovative. I think that's very important for the challenges we are meeting, that are facing us in the future, and there are so many talented individuals. I mean, it's just and we need them. We really need them, and we need them at their best to solve what's ahead of us. And in this kind of almost like this loop going back to where I started, like this knowledge and interest in the knowledge I have about how to facilitate the development of skills that we have been talking about so far, and the human capacities that we overall that we have been talking about, is really something that I will be able to do hands-on right now.
Imac, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much. I've been talking a lot nonstop, but it was really nice and to talk to you. I had a great time.
You as well. I learned a lot. Thank you.
Thank you.